Welcome to Unapologetically Sensitive, where you can learn, relate, laugh, and maybe even live a bolder, brighter life. I'm your host, Patricia Young. This is a weekly podcast where we explore the strengths we have because of our sensitivity and some of the challenges it poses as well. The information in this podcast is not a substitute for help from a licensed mental health professional. Hey there, to the creatives, healers, sensitives, and deep thinkers. How are you doing? If you celebrate Christmas and you're listening to this when this gets released, it's the day after Christmas. If you're listening at some other time and you celebrate something else, happy holidays. This episode with Jen is kind of interesting. We talk about a couple of things, but we start out with Jen had in her mind communicated something with me, but did not communicate it with me where I heard it because she didn't tell me. And we talk about how deficits in executive functioning come up, and we give a couple of examples. So it may sound familiar. We talk about ways that people self-medicate, not in a negative way, but oftentimes using caffeine or energy drinks is how people regulate, and you may be doing it and not know it. And so we talk a little bit about that. We talk about medication, not pro or con, but just what our experience has been and how if you get one area managed, then sometimes other things start coming up. So I think it's a really enlightening episode. Towards the very end, if the holidays are hard for you, we do get around to acknowledging that towards the end, but I think it took us a little bit of time. But I had a realization about why Christmas cards are a challenge for me. I kind of unpacked something that I really didn't even know that was there. And we talk about all different ways to celebrate the holidays because this is the end of the year. If there are rituals or things that you want to do to reflect on the year, do some writing. Jen usually waits until spring to do it, which was kind of an eye-opener because I'm so literal. If I don't get it done by the end of the year, then it's too late. I think in terms of neurodivergence and how our brains are wired, I give an example of something that my husband and I experienced and just how we see things so differently, and a conversation that I had with my doctor deciding to disclose whether or not I'm autistic. So there's all kinds of stuff in this episode that I think is very rich, and I would hope that a lot of it is relatable. So I think I'm just going to let you listen to the episode. And now, on to the show. Hey, Jen, how are you?
Hi, Patricia. Surprisingly well, actually. I'm doing good today. Yeah. Oh, gosh, sleep is delicious when it comes. I had a good night's sleep, so despite a lot of stuff going on, it's been a hard week. It's been like that week when you have a funeral, and something unexpected. And so lots of big feelings, lots of allowing all kinds of emotions, but surprisingly feeling pretty grounded and centered and kind of at peace with all the human life on planet Earth stuff. So thanks for asking. How about you?
Sure. I'm doing okay. I'm in a good spot. I've really had a hard time with my productivity recently. I just recorded an episode. So for the listener, I talk about this in 225. So I'm not going to talk too much about it today, but just been having a hard time getting stuff done. But I did record an episode before we recorded because we've just had so many conflicts that we haven't been able to record. And then you had this unexpected funeral. But before we started recording, this morning you sent me a polo and it's like, okay, I'll see you for recording it. You said your time and I converted to my time and kind of scratched my head because I had made some other plans because we were supposed to record yesterday, but you had this funeral. And I just assumed that you had a conversation with me in your head that you failed to communicate with me. So I wasn't upset and it was fine, but we talked about it a little bit before. But I was just talking with a client about this the other day, that there's something about my PDA and my sense of reality that when somebody has, my sense of reality is, you thought about this, but we didn't talk about it, bumps up against my PDA and this sense of like, we did not have this conversation. And it was just interesting to notice that it happened. And I think that we can have, so if you're a new listener, you don't know, I'm autistic. PDA is Pathological Demand Avoidance, or Pervasive Persistent Drive for Autonomy. And when I feel like there's a loss of autonomy on my part, it activates a nervous system dysregulation. If you see it in kids, it can be very dysregulated, angry, having tantrums. I think I've lived with it for so long without knowing what it was that I think I've managed ways to navigate it fairly well. But it was interesting. So we talked about it when we hopped on today.
Oh, Patricia. So yeah, I am curious how the PDA shows up for you. So you gave us an example for a toddler. Like, what happens inside you?
I think I've lived with it for so long that it's not too bad, but my sense of reality, when my sense of reality is not congruent with somebody else's. So in this sense, like you're like, okay, so we're meeting today at so-and-so time. And I'm like, oh, we did not have this conversation. I'm very clear that you did not communicate this with me. So I'm kind of like, huh? Yeah. But I think I've learned to hold it lightly without getting really upset. But I think that's also the nature of our relationship. If this was something that happened frequently and you didn't own it, that would really push me.
Yeah.
But I think the things that help to soften it for me is knowing that I don't think you listened to my polo yet, but I left a polo back to you like, I don't think we talked about this. And when we did talk, when we connected before we started recording, a really common thing with ADHD is having a conversation with someone in your head, but you really haven't had that conversation. And I just figured that was probably what happened because we talked about possibly rescheduling. But because there are areas with my ADHD that you think that there's not a brain in my head because there are certain things that I do not track and do not do very well. However, there's a part of my memory and conversations that is just like on it. And unless I start losing my mind, which is an ongoing fear, I was very clear that we did not have this conversation. But I've learned how to go like, we didn't talk about this. What do you do? Like that part doesn't come out. But I think I said to you, like, I don't think we had this conversation out loud with each other.
Yeah. Yes. And in our little conversation just then, like I did own it completely. Like I think what had happened, because we meet on Tuesdays one week and on Wednesdays the next week. Funeral was on Tuesday. And I'm pretty sure what happened is kind of, as you say, I moved you over in my schedule instead of canceling because I did have 2:00 today available and just never got around to telling you, like, you don't live in my head with me, Patricia, right? And readily able to be like, oops, sorry about that. Like you're not in my head. And I think, it's funny because I'm thinking about a really significant relationship in my life where this would happen a lot and the person didn't own it. And it's such a, what you were saying about is my sense of reality match. And that's in a lot of ways a shared reality and a shared understanding and perspective of the world is what intimacy is. It's like how much of that overlaps. It can never overlap completely. Like we have different perspectives, we have totally different experiences, and the degree of openness that we can hear about what happened for the other person and own if, we had a quirk, which I'm fine with being quirky. I'm very, very quirky.
Right. And knowing that our brains work differently and how we show up is different. It's funny. I was thinking, I swim a couple times a week. And when I come home, I have a bathrobe, I have a rash guard, I have a hat and a swim cap. And I rinse out the rash guard. I put everything on the kitchen counter. The bathing suit, I go straight and take a shower. And in the shower, I take off the bathing suit, I rinse it and I hang it up. I abhor hanging my wet stuff out on the clothesline. I abhor it. I suspect that it's sensory, that I don't like the dripping water. I don't like getting wet. Even though I rinse my rash guard out and I squeeze it out, it has to be done again. I don't like walking with dripping clothes. I suspect that it's sensory. I'm sure that there are things that I don't like, but I've never investigated why and I haven't dialed in. But my guess is it's sensory. And sometimes the stuff will sit there overnight. Not great. I'm not proud of it. I'm just saying. And a couple of times I said to my husband, I hate hanging this stuff up. Like, I just don't like it. And he says, I'm happy to hang it up for you. I'm like, if you don't mind, I would really appreciate it. I came home yesterday, went through my routine. He came home, was home for a couple of hours. I'm thinking, I thought you were going to hang it up and it's still sitting out there. And then I said, are you okay hanging up my stuff? He's like, I totally forgot. And my brain goes to, it's sitting on the freaking counter right next to the sink and you've been in there. How can you not remember? And our brains just work very, very differently. And because part of my genetic makeup is there are certain details. I mean, you've told me before, like you'll tell me something like, well, who's going to be with your daughter? How are they going to get there? part of my autism is logistics and being very focused on logistics. Why, I can't tell you. It's just how my brain is and remembering certain things. So in my mind, how can he walk by my wet clothes? Like, I can walk by them for 24 hours and leave them. And some people could not do that. And he can walk by them and not remember that he said he'd hang them up. And he said, you're just going to have to remind me. I'm like, I'm glad you said something, because I'm sitting here thinking, we had this discussion. But these are the things that we need to talk about with the people that we care about, because if we didn't, I would be thinking like, you didn't mean it. You changed your mind. What's wrong with you? And maybe he'd be thinking like, why isn't she hanging up her stuff? I don't know. Our brains are different.
Checking the meaning that we're making things. And I love the generosity around seeing it as a nervous system response. And it's funny how the examples we're giving, this was, in our case, a conversation that didn't happen.
Right.
And caused, what do they want? I just watched The Matrix with my teenager. You know, what do they say? Like a riff in the, the Matrix or the continuum. You're like, wait, what? And then in the case that you were just describing with your husband, it's a conversation that did happen, but then, and so these things, they abound, right, in human relationships, and how much humor, generosity, acknowledgement that there is a caveman part of us. There's a definitely wild animal part of us that wants to, I know in my case, I'll want to slam a door. I'm not proud of that fact. But I will have this burst, and then I have a repair to make, right? Like I've made a little mess. Yeah. And I got to go clean it up. But that it's not necessarily, it happens, like it's not like I dial up, you know what? I'm going to be I'm thinking of curse words, and I know I can't curse on your podcast. I'm going to be that person that does this like slamming. And if we can be generous with ourselves and with others. Yeah. It's okay. That pissed you off. And I had some beautiful repairs the other day after, because this was actually it hadn't happened in a while, but it's a recent occurrence. And that if we can really shift, that it's that repair work, it's the owning it and the repair, right? And the coming back together. Sometimes I like to think of shared realities like an imaginary circle that's at our feet. Right. And so we're in this little circle, and the circle follows us throughout, like NFL films. Like, they are so amazing. Like when you're watching football and there's this like circle under the player. So this just follows us around. And then when we're interacting with someone, the degree to which their circle is overlapping with your circle, kind of like a Venn diagram, right, is the shared intimacy, and the part where you can sort of rest and you don't have that like response, but knowing that there's plenty of around, because your two circles can't overlap completely. You're never going to have exactly the same perspective on everything. Right. And then it's tell me what that was like for you. Right. You know, which is kind of where we started. How does PDA show up in your body? Right. I mean, if you're going to be around me, you might see a door slam, and hopefully you don't come to make that mean that I'm blank, you know, or whatever. Right. It's something to be worked through and understood. And that kind of generosity is really important. Yeah, absolutely. It's interesting when you were talking about that. I was a door slammer, and we had an alley, and I used to break glass in the alley. And I can remember being a kid and getting mad and throwing a hairbrush, and it broke. And I made a decision, like, I will never break anything I care about again. Like, I'm not going to do that. My profile is highly controlled in certain areas. And I did some things in childhood out of anger that I just feel awful about. I'm not going to talk about them, but I feel awful about those things. So it's very possible that if that profile fits you, you continue to do those things. Or like me, you found other ways to adapt because it didn't go well for you to do those things. And it's okay however it shows up. And we do need to have that sense of power, and when we're angry, and it's just energy that needs to move through us. Yeah, and awareness, and working with that sort of more primal parts of ourselves. I mean, that's what you would call like enlightenment or awakening, right? It's the ability in that moment to make a choice where it feels like you can't make a choice. And sometimes we're there and sometimes we're not there. Right. I guess I've been a slammer for a while. I remember my dad taking the door right off the hinges. I had to hang a sheet up if I wanted any privacy when I was a kid.
I did that for my son. I'm not proud of it, but he slammed his door. I'm like, you can't slam your door. He's like, oh, yes, I can. I said, I'm going to take your door off. He's like, watch me. He slammed his door and I took his door off.
You're like, watch
I'm
me.
not proud of it. I don't recommend it. I'm just saying, been there, done that, when things get really heated. And I have a kid who acted out, meaning he got very angry and verbal when he was upset. And I sometimes reacted too. It activated, I think, developmentally when we have our parts that we weren't allowed to experience, and we have a child that's at that age where our parts weren't allowed to express, those parts come out. Not proud of it, but repair work.
We sure do. Mm-hmm. Stuff to talk about years later.
Yeah, definitely. It's interesting. Recently, I was talking with some other women who identified as HSP, then learned they're autistic, and we were talking about ADHD and meds. And it's funny that it's just so interesting. I'm so accustomed to being how I am that I'm really reluctant to go on medication for my ADHD. And it may make a difference and it may not, but I think sometimes we're so familiar with how we are. My kids were on ADHD meds from the time they were probably in first grade through college. And when they went to college, they decided they didn't want to take them anymore. And they were young adults and they were allowed to make that decision. I can see how I think things might be a little bit easier for at least one of them, maybe the other, if they had a little bit more regulation. But it's so easy to wonder about how would things be different if this is all I've known and I'm accustomed to the things that I struggle with, that they just seem very normal. And what if they were different?
Yeah, it's funny. I was working with a divine feminine teacher and we were talking about ADHD, and she kind of put it in this framework of there's like this neurotypical sort of way you're supposed to do things. And so sometimes an effort, and I'm not for or against medication. It's a tool. I've been on it, I've been off it, right? We are in interaction with our environment and the expectations from the environment. My daughter's in a school that's who they are there for, kids with dyslexia and with ADHD. Mm-hmm. And so she's not medicated. She does well, but the environment accommodates her. Mm-hmm. And so I think sometimes our expectations of ourselves, not just for productivity, but also like how it's done, the medicines can really help us kind of conform to some of what those expectations are, where I'm also like really, really curious. Like if the world were run by HSPs, it would look a very different world, right? Like if we designed everything, if we were what was more like the mainstream kind of thing.
Neurodivergent folks, you mean? Not specifically HSPs?
Not specifically HSPs, neurodivergent folks. Exactly. Yeah. Thank you. What, at least in, here in my life, where we've both crafted lives that for the most part, this is debatable some days, work for us, at least for my part. I'll speak for myself. But what's the invitation there? I know my ADHD right now is pretty problematic. I mean, I do want to acknowledge that it disrupted your day today, or at least, threw in a little funny wrench of sorts. And I know that it does for my kids and my own self, how I move in the world, and how okay am I with that? Or how much do I really want to make an effort to look like what would be a little bit more expected? And I have to come up with a way to really take stock of that. I seem to, in this kind of more intuitive way, like not miss a whole lot. It doesn't look pretty. It doesn't look like, it looks like I'm teetering on the edge of a mountain sometimes is what it feels like.
Yeah.
But I seem to always get done what needs to get done.
Yeah.
So I don't know. Yeah. I don't know. I know I've been flirting with the idea of addressing it. And I just came off Wellbutrin, which has something to offer for ADHD. So now I'm kind of in this pit of like, woof, no, there's no rails.
Right. And if you're someone who has caffeine regularly or energy drinks, that you may be unknowingly self-medicating. And that's just information, because if you have ADHD, it seems counterintuitive, but the caffeine actually slows the brain down. And it is interesting that one of my kids, there are some things that I've read about energy drinks that concern me. And so I've forwarded information to them. And one of my kids has started drinking an energy drink, and we talked about it. We looked at it, and, I don't have control over what he does, but I suspect that it's helping him to regulate, which is why he's having this energy drink. It appears to be in moderation. Again, not my business. So if you find yourself drawn to things that are caffeinated, or you can have coffee at night and it helps you relax for bed, and you're not diagnosed, could be ADHD.
Yeah. Yes. Coffee definitely has a central place in my life.
Yeah. Yeah. It's also possible that if you are someone who is working with the therapist, or, is wondering, am I autistic? Do I have ADHD? That protocol generally is to treat the ADHD first. So if you're interested in medication, we get the medication squared away so the ADHD is manageable. And then it's very possible that the autistic symptoms end up presenting even more. Or if you're someone who struggles with anxiety, that you get the anxiety better managed, then the autistic symptoms seem to present even more. And a friend of mine who's also ADHD, that we talk about in which areas of our life is our ADHD or our autism more present. And like the piles in the house, that's my ADHD. Paperwork, finishing things, phone calls, that's my ADHD. The part of me that's tasky and on time and, more on that wanting to be prepared side, like that's my autism.
Yeah, when you had mentioned that to me before, I am really curious what might happen if I sincerely made it a focus. See what I did there? To address the ADHD. What might come out?
Yeah. Yeah. And when you and I had talked about this earlier, previously, because for me, I see your ADHD is very present, just a statement, not a judgment, that when you were questioning, am I autistic? Am I not autistic? As we've talked, I see more things that could be autism, but because the ADHD is so forward presenting, that it would, for me, I'd almost want to see like if the ADHD was better managed, and maybe that language isn't right, that I'm curious to see if there would be more autistic symptoms that would come forward then.
Yeah, well, I will keep you posted. Like if I'm very happy to talk about it. It's an interesting question to me. So, gosh, I had a doctor's appointment, but it was back in my old neighborhood, which was an hour away. And on Monday at 6 p.m., that did not feel good. So I canceled it, and I hope to find one around here.
Yeah. Well, with all the things that happened, it was in retrospect, it was not that I questioned that it wasn't a good decision to cancel, but in retrospect, it wouldn't have worked anyway. So, you knew that it wasn't going to work.
Yeah, no, I know. It's so hard. I had a practitioner at that practice that I absolutely loved. And then she's leaving the practice anyway. Yeah. So yeah, it's hard. I'm on the hunt.
Yeah.
It can be really, whether you're looking for any medical practitioner, or even just trying to find a good therapist, one that you really click with, can be pretty time consuming and difficult. And there's emotional responses that pop up to that.
Yeah, you've got to be persistent. That reminds me, I didn't share this story with the listeners yet. Jen, I told you. So I had an appointment with my doctor the Tuesday before Thanksgiving, and really been struggling with, do I want to disclose that I'm autistic? I'm very concerned about having it in my chart, only because if I get referred somewhere and they pull up my chart before they meet me and they see autistic, that many, many, many practitioners just do not know what autism looks like, what the lived experience of autism looks like. And I don't want to be treated any differently. I don't want people to make decisions on my behalf, to make judgments before they meet me. If they meet me and they make judgments, I have no control over that. But I really have strong feelings about it. And so I had asked, I'm seeing a resident, and I said, if I told you that I had a diagnosis, would you have to put it in my chart? She's like, I don't know. So she brought in the supervising physician who came in and very poorly on the spot, said, okay, can we play a game? If I give you some diagnoses, can you tell me if they would need to go in somebody's chart? Not having thought this through and not being great at playing spontaneous games. Oh. I'm like, okay, if I had, and I explained what my concerns were. And part of the concern that I shared is I'm really seeing how incredibly dysregulated I get at doctor's appointments. And I was raised to be incredibly stoic because I'm an internalizer. You don't really see any of this stuff externally, but internally I'm starting to see. And so I have this little fidget ring that I just bring with me, and I, slide it up and down each finger the whole time I'm having my appointment. And I don't really care if they see it or not. That feels like the most quiet, least obtrusive stim that I can bring with me. And I explained to the physician that it's very, very hard for me to have these appointments. And if I had a practitioner who didn't understand, and I'm already having a hard time just managing, and then I have to take extra energy to explain and educate about, because I have an autism diagnosis doesn't mean that I'm not capable. Like, I don't have the energy for that. And that would just be too much. And I don't want to put myself in that position to have extra energy to advocate and educate. So I said, can we play this game? She said, sure. I'm like, okay, what if I had bipolar disorder? I think I said borderline personality disorder. And then I jumped in and said, no, you need that, because if I came in and was acting in a way that I was very emotionally dysregulated, they need to know. So I kind of blew the game to start with. I said, how about autism? And she paused and she basically said, probably not. And then, I had no other ideas. I'm like, I said, okay, suck at these games. And she kind of laughed. And without naming it, we kind of knew that autism is what we were talking about. And she finished and she left. And then the resident, my physician, was in the room. And so I talked to her about what she might see and how this shows up. I like to have information, like, this is why I come with a binder every time. This is why I have all my lab work. This is why I like to know what's going on, that gives me a sense of peace. And she said she really appreciated that. And then I did share with her, she was writing something up. I said, can I talk while you're doing that? And she said, yeah. And I told her about how I chirp when I leave. And if it's a really bad appointment, like you can hear me in the parking store, you're like, burp, 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 burp. I said, last time I saw you, it was just 3 chirps in the elevator and I was done. And she said, how many chirps will it be this time? Which I appreciated. She engaged with me in my world. Yeah. And honestly, I said, I don't know until I leave the appointment. I just don't know how it's going to be. But it felt incredibly significant in my autism journey to disclose to a healthcare practitioner who could harm me, and if not her, then somebody else, by disclosing this information, but claiming part of my identity. And I also shared there are many things that are comorbid with being autistic. And that's one of the reasons why I want you to have this information. So if these other things do come up, these are things that are very connected to being autistic.
So how many trips was it?
I think it was just 3 in the elevator. I was really surprised. And I felt so proud afterwards. Like, it was difficult, and being able to have humor about my inability to play a party game to try.
That's funny.
It was not well thought out. Like, I don't lie on the spot very well, coming up with spontaneous things on the spot. If I have time to plan, then I can lie with a purpose. If it's, like for a surprise party or something, but spontaneous things like that. My son like, as long as you don't break it, you can bend the truth as far as you want. Like, he just thinks it's a game, and he'll have a shirt on and somebody like, oh, are you from Florida? And he'll make up a story and an identity. And like, that is very exhilarating to him. And I'd be like,
yeah, that's how I am. It's funny. Yeah, I can't.
Yeah. Yeah. Do we want to talk about end of the year stuff or no?
Do we want to talk about end of the year stuff? Oh my goodness. The year's ending?
Yeah. This is the last podcast of 2023.
Oh, right. When it airs. Yeah. End of year stuff. Probably just to say that if you need your end of year to be 30 days from now, like, go for it. Yeah. I think we put a lot of pressure on this time of year.
Yeah.
And we've got, I know for where I'm at here on the East Coast, we've got several weeks or months of sort of the time of year that invites some contemplative space. So I may decide to have my end of January. So if that feels that it supports you, join me in the end of January. Because I don't know, I feel like it's just such a race from our holiday season kicks off on Halloween. And it's just, oof. I mean, I need to wait to do some of that. What we usually, what are we talking about with like end of year, right? Reflections, looking forward, right? Dreaming, planting seeds. Yeah, I like to do mine in January. I like to see spring is like, that's my new year. Is when spring is in March.
I think because I tend to be very literal and concrete. And it's not that the writing always gets done, but I think if I don't make it by the end of December, I'm just like, I missed it. So it's interesting as I'm hearing you talking like, oh, there's a little bit of rigid thinking there. I've been doing this for years, and it's always interesting that I write about where I'm at in my relationship, professionally, financially, relationships, my relationship with my body. I haven't looked at it this year, so I'd have to see what else is there. But I have all these things and I read the previous years, and then it's always I'm fascinated to see the things that I was struggling with a year ago that maybe aren't even an issue or on my radar anymore. And then there's usually new things. And then I also like to write about what is it that I want to create more or less of. I, for me, do not do resolutions because they don't work. And I usually break them. But what are things that I want more of? What are things that I want less of? What do I want to create more of in my life? And it really is kind of a sweet time to reflect. I also realized a couple people that I know are sending Christmas cards out this year. We used to send a picture and a letter. And I was thinking about, sending Christmas cards, and I'm embarrassed to say this out loud, but it's true. I don't like just putting, love in my name. I feel like I want to write something that's a heartfelt sentiment if I'm going to do it. And it feels like that would take so much labor on my part to sit down and contemplate about the year and what's going on in our family. Like that feels easy, but to have to sit down and generate something that feels authentic about each person that I send something to feels like so much labor that I'm just like, no, not going to do it. And that's not a judgment on if you send Christmas cards out or holiday cards or Hanukkah cards or Kwanzaa or whatever you celebrate. I'm just saying Christmas for us. And you just write love in your name. There's nothing wrong with that. But I have this tendency to want to reciprocate and honoring that, like, just not going to work.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Do you send cards out?
I haven't done cards in a while. I used to. I had a really nice list, and I think I've been kind of all over the map depending on my energy. Like this is one of the, I guess, I don't know, byproduct, if we don't want to necessarily put a judgment on it, of that unstructured space that I tend to live in, Some years it's pictures and a handwritten note. Sometimes it is just the love. Sometimes it's not at all, depending on what's going on. And, again, it is what it is, like being careful not to make meaning out of that. Right?
Yeah.
It's reflective of how I am during that time. I know I had a friend once that would, kind of similar to how I feel about doing that kind of New Year's writing and reflecting, she would send out Valentine's Day cards, and that would be in a place that felt more spacious, more able to attend. And, we're human. We have our limitations, and finding what works for you and what feels good.
Yeah.
I appreciate what you're saying. And I know that for me, sometimes being able to just say, love Jen, is that, you're in my mind. I thought to do this. It's funny. I just did buy a stack of cards. I had to get a card for the funeral. And when I, sympathy card. And then when I was in the little card section, I picked up a couple, one to mail to myself and then one for, someone that's going through a hard time. And so I did just drop a letter in the mail, and it's not something that I have the bandwidth to do often.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's really lovely, isn't it? Like when it is there. So it's such a gift, and I certainly hope it's received that way. And depending on, it's not just the giver, it's also what kind of bandwidth does the receiver have. I know I've certainly gotten things, and in the flurry, not been able to really receive as fully either. Yeah. So one thing I do, and I have to go look for it, is I will pack my Christmas cards that I've received away with the Christmas decorations. Around here, it's solstice. We celebrate the winter solstice, or Yule, right? And it's nice to pull those out and see them through the years. So I don't know that anybody that sends me one knows that I do that, but that's the sort of, so that I can receive it even across a couple of years.
Yeah.
So, just curious and open about what it means.
Well, it's interesting as you were talking, I've kind of been to like 5 places in my head. The first one was a place of envy. Like my mom corresponds with people, so she always gets a lot of Christmas cards, and she displays them on a door really beautifully. And I feel like a loser because we don't get them. And then when I was sending them out regularly and then didn't receive as many back, I felt like, well, why do we do this if people aren't reciprocating? And then I also receive cards from people that we never send cards out. And I've reconnected with a distant family member who just last night asked for our address because they're sending us a card. And I sent an emoji, and this is all you're going to get because I just don't send them out. But then as you were talking, it's like, but it is a gift to just send it out without having, because I always pick out the cards. I'm very intentional about the picture and the card, and I just can't send something that doesn't say something that's not true for me. So it's just interesting. I feel like I've just sort of gone through this whole layer of things about expectations and disappointments, and is it enough? And, oh, this is a nice thing. But then you have to reciprocate, but then I get frustrated when other people don't reciprocate. I mean, it's just, there really is a lot to unpack around this. And somebody could just say, like, it's just a Christmas card.
Yep. Yes.
Yes to both.
And another thing, like I have a very sweet cousin who I doubt I've ever gotten a card from, but every single major, minor holiday will send me a text. And that has turned out to be very dear.
Yeah.
And that's what he has the bandwidth for. And it's often a GIF or a GIF or however you say that. Or if something else is going on in his life, like right now it's a picture of his daughter. Yeah. So yeah, I guess just chaperoning the meaning we make out of things and taking it with a grain of salt, right?
Yeah.
And then figuring, it is really okay to, whatever your context is this season. I was just talking with a client about this today. It's a holiday in a long line of holidays, past and future. And if this is whatever this is the one, right? This is like, for me, it's, I guess, a couple of years post-divorce, very single, right? And this one is going to be what it's going to be. And so whatever your situation is, if you're in a season where work is needing more resources and you don't have you don't have the bandwidth available, or maybe it's a family struggle or a health issue or whatever it might be, like, it's okay. It's in your story. And this is, that Christmas. Yeah. I mean, I remember, my my dear grandma died on Christmas Eve, and that was that Christmas. And it had a very different feel through the years. So sometimes expanding our context across years can take out some of the intensity of like this one, getting it all in, getting it all right. Hopefully we have money. Maybe not, but we hope.
Yeah, Steve's dad died in our home on Christmas morning.
Yeah,
made it really hard.
We've ever talked about this.
Yeah. And as you're talking, I'm thinking some people do not like the holidays. There's not family, there's not connection. Terrible things have happened, and so the holidays activate all kinds of things. If you've been divorced or you've lost somebody, or
I mean, what we just looked and saw what could be unpacked with just the cards. Right. I mean, so be gentle, right? Like there's certainly a lot here. I know I have some people dear to me that we have a boundary right now, and we are separate but still connected, but through the holidays. So yeah. Oof, it's a lot.
It is a lot. It's a time to be really gentle. Yeah. And I suspect that everybody, like, I didn't realize how much I had around Christmas cards until we started to talk about it. And my guess is that lots of people have lots of things that just have not been unpacked yet. Like when we were talking about the Halloween costumes, like I didn't realize, like, oh, what are all the things that go on for me around that? And I thought it was body image, but I think a lot of it has to do with censoring and PDA. Yeah. So all of these things that we just reframe and we look at differently as we get more information. And if we can do it with as much compassion and gentleness. And if you can't, that's okay too.
Absolutely. Just honoring whatever it is that's coming up, whether it's peaceful or gentle or not I'm not sure anyone can find me this year. I've moved twice in 18 months. I think it's going to be kind of quiet my way.
You want to give everybody your address?
No. Send me a Christmas card. Yeah. No. It's all good.
Yeah. I think that's all I have. How about you?
Yeah, I'm good, hon. Thank you.
All right. Have a great day. Thank you.
You too, my dear. Bye.
Bye. Hey again. So how was that? Did you find some things that you related to? Any questions? Any concerns? Any relief? Any new insights? If you're interested in working with Jen, you can reach out to Jen at heartfulnessconsulting.com. If you're interested in working with me, you can reach out to me at unapologeticallysensitive.com. If you are longing for a sense of connection and belonging and being around people who are wired like you, I hear so many people talk about struggling with friendships and relationships, and partners don't understand them, and this feeling of being too much or too sensitive or too picky or too needy or too dramatic or too analytical, whatever the two is, that if you are longing to be in a place where you really feel seen and heard and valued with other people that are wired like you, you might consider the online HSP course. I'm in the process of reconfiguring the course, but the way it's recorded is for HSPs. If you listen to, I think it's next week's episode, I interview Ellie, who just took the online HSP course, who is also autistic. And she talks about what her experience was being autistic in the HSP course. I really want to open this up to a wider range of folks who identify as neurodivergent, whether that's autistic or HSP. We're not going to debate HSP versus autism. If you have questions, I'm happy to discuss them, but I want to broaden this. Jen and I don't know that we're going to be able to do new videos. So I feel like I'm hesitating more than I should, but this is just what you get with me. I would like to have more people be able to take advantage of this experience because it really is a very powerful experience. The course is 10 weeks. It starts February 5th, 2024, will end April 15th. It's 10 weeks, but there's a holiday in there. It will take place on Mondays from 3 to 4:20 p.m. Pacific Standard Time. So if you're in another time zone, you need to convert. In the course, every week you get an email with a video, and there's a video that Jen and I made about each week's topic. There are usually extra resources if you want them. This is a very neurodivergent, affirming group. And if you don't want to have your camera on, if you don't want to share, if you want to eat during group, if you want to be in your pajamas in your bed, this really is about having a place where you can show up and be authentically you, whatever that is. If you are autistic and you stim, you can stim on or off camera. Doesn't matter to me. I really want this to be a place where you get to be who you are and not have to be somebody that you think everybody thinks that you should be. The topics that we cover are expectations and disappointments, mindfulness and self-compassion, identifying negative messages and turning them into strengths, perfectionism, embracing our emotions, self-care is non-negotiable, boundaries, communication, authenticity, and vulnerability, and creating a lifestyle that honors the HSP. Registration will open up on January 10th and go through January 24th. The first week, there's a little bit of a discount. If you go to my website, unapologeticallysensitive.com, and go to the HSP groups page, there are lots and lots of clips of people that have taken the course. There's videos, there's 1-minute clips if you want more information. I just had somebody set up a consult with me because she just wanted to see if she was a good fit for the group. So if you want to do a free 20-minute consult with me to see what you think, most people hate groups. They don't want to be in groups. They've had bad experiences in groups. This group is really, really different. I limit it to 8 people. It's a very intimate setting, incredibly supportive and validating. So if you're longing for that sense of connection and belonging, you might want to check it out. I think that's all I have to say. Remember, sensitivity is nothing to apologize for. It's how you're wired. This time of the year can be very challenging. It can be mixed. You may be feeling very joyful, excited, overstimulated, overwhelmed, overworked, undervalued, underappreciated. You may feel lonely, sad, angry, disconnected. You may be having concerns with health or finances or work or family or children. It is a lot. It's a very, very charged and loaded time of year. So my hope is that you are being as kind and gentle as you can to yourself. It's okay to do it imperfectly. Rupture and repair is okay. You can't really screw it up. We can always go in and try and do what we can do after the fact if things are hard. And it's okay if they're hard. It's okay if you're not managing as well as you do, that things are slipping and you're forgetting. It does not have to be perfect. It's about being authentic, being messy, just being real. And if it's hard, I'm sorry that it's hard. And if it's joyful, I'm glad that it's joyful. And if it's a little bit of both, that's okay too. I think that's all I have. Have a blessed day.